Cold War, that also contributed to the increase of cost-effective anti-tank rocket-propelled grenades, RPGs, worldwide, and its successors. The ability of tanks to operate independently has declined. Modern tanks are more frequently organized into combined arms units which involve the support of infantry, whom accompany the tanks in infantry fighting vehicles, and supported by reconnaissance or ground attack aircraft. 14. History. Conceptions. The tank is the 20th century realization of an ancient concept, that of providing troops with mobile protection and firepower. The internal combustion engine, armor plate, and continuous track were key innovations leading to the invention of the modern tank. Model of Leonardo da Vinci's fighting vehicle. Many sources imply that Leonardo da Vinci and H.G. Wells in some way foresaw or invented the tank. Leonardo's late 15th century drawings of what some describe as a tank show a man-powered, wheeled vehicle with cannons all around it. However, the human crew would not have enough power to move it over larger distance, and usage of animals was problematic in a space so confined. In the 15th century, Janica built armored wagons containing cannons and used them effectively in several battles. The continuous caterpillar track arose from attempts to improve the mobility of wheeled vehicles by spreading their weight, reducing ground pressure, and increasing their traction. Experiments can be traced back as far as the 17th century, and by the late 19th they existed in various recognizable and practical forms in several countries. It is frequently claimed that Richard Lovell Edgeworth created a caterpillar track. It is true that in 1770 he patented a machine that should carry and lay down its own road, but this was Edgeworth's choice of words. His own account in his autobiography is of a horse-drawn wooden carriage on 8 retractable legs capable of lifting itself over high walls. The description bears no similarity to a caterpillar track. 15. Armored trains appeared in the mid-19th century, and various armored steam and petrol-engined vehicles were also proposed. The machines described in Wells' 1903 short story The Land Ironclads are a step closer, insofar as they are armor-plated, have an internal power plant, and are able to cross trenches. 16. Some aspects of the story foresee the tactical use and impact of the tanks that later came into being. However, Wells' vehicles were driven by steam and moved on pedrail wheels, technologies that were already outdated at the time of writing. After seeing British tanks in 1916, Wells denied having invented them, writing, "Yet let me state at once that I was not their prime originator. I took up an idea, manipulated it slightly, and handed it on." 17. It is, though, possible that one of the British tank pioneers, Ernest Swinton, was subconsciously or otherwise influenced by Wells' tale. 18. 19. The first combinations of the three principal components of the tank appeared in the decade before World War I. In 1903, Captain Léon René Levasseur of the French artillery proposed mounting a field gun in an armored box on tracks. Major William E. Donoghue, of the British Army's Mechanical Transport Committee, suggested fixing a gun and armored shield on a British type of track-driven vehicle. 20. First armored car was produced in Austria in 1904. However, all were restricted to rails or reasonably passable terrain. It was the development of a practical caterpillar track that provided the necessary independent, all-terrain mobility. In a memorandum of 1908, Antarctic explorer Robert Falcon Scott presented his view that man hauling to the South Pole was impossible and that motor traction was needed. 21. Snow vehicles did not yet exist, however, and so his engineer Reginald Skelton developed the idea of a caterpillar track for snow surfaces. 22. These tracked motors were built by the Wolseley Tool and Motor Car Company in Birmingham, tested in Switzerland and Norway, and can be seen in action in Herbert Ponting's 1911 documentary film of Scott's Antarctic Terra Nova expedition. 23. Scott died during the expedition in 1912, but expedition member and biographer Apsley Cherry-Garrard credited Scott's motors with the inspiration for the British World War I tanks, writing, "Scott never knew their true possibilities, for they were the direct ancestors of the tanks in France." 24. In 1911, a lieutenant engineer in the Austrian army, Gunther Burstin, presented to the Austrian and Prussian War Ministries plans for a light, three-man tank with a gun in a revolving turret, the so-called Burstin Motorschutz. 25. In the same year, an Australian civil engineer named Lancelot de Mol submitted a basic design for a tracked, armoured vehicle to the British War Office. 26. In Russia, Vasily Mendeleev designed a tracked vehicle containing a large naval gun. 27. All of these ideas were rejected and by 1914, forgotten, although it was officially acknowledged after the war that de Mol's design was at least equal to the initial British tanks. Various individuals continued to contemplate the use of tracked vehicles for military applications, but by the outbreak of the war no one in a position of responsibility in any army gave much thought to tanks. World War I. United Kingdom. Film clip of World War I era tanks. The direct military impact of the tank can be debated, but its effect on the Germans was immense. It caused bewilderment, terror and concern in equal measure. It was also a huge boost to the civilians at home. After facing the Zeppelins, at last Britain had a wonder weapon. Tanks were taken on tours and treated almost like film stars. David Willey, curator at the Tank Museum, Bovington. 11. From late 1914, a small number of middle-ranking British Army officers tried to persuade the War Office and the government to consider the creation of armoured vehicles. Amongst their suggestions was the use of Caterpillar tractors, but although the Army used many such vehicles for towing heavy guns, it could not persuade it that they could be adapted as armoured vehicles. The consequence was that early tank development in the United Kingdom was carried out by the Royal Navy. British World War I Mark V** tank as the result of an approach by Royal Naval Air Service officers who had been operating armoured cars on the Western Front. The First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, formed the Landship Committee on the 20th of February 1915. 28. The Director of Naval Construction for the Royal Navy, Eustace Tennyson d'Eyncourt, was appointed to head the committee in view of his experience with the engineering methods it was felt might be required. The two other members were naval officers, and a number of industrialists were engaged as consultants. So many played a part in its long and complicated development that it is not possible to name any individual as the sole inventor of the tank. 28. However, leading roles were played by Lieutenant Walter Gordon Wilson RN, who designed the gearbox and developed practical tracks, and by William Tritton, whose agricultural machinery company, William Foster and Company in Lincoln, Lincolnshire, England, built the prototypes. 11. 29. On the 22nd of July, 1915, a commission was placed to design a machine that could cross a trench 4 feet wide. 11. Secrecy surrounded the project, with the designers locking themselves in a room at the White Hart Hotel in Lincoln. 11. The committee's first design, Little Willie, ran for the first time in September 1915 and served to develop the form of the track, but an improved design, better able to cross trenches, swiftly followed, and in January 1916 the prototype, nicknamed Mother, was adopted as the design for future tanks. The first order for tanks was placed on 12 February 1916, and a second on the 21st of April. Foster's built 37, all-mail, and Metropolitan Railway Carriage and Wagon Company, of Birmingham, 113, 38 male and 75 female, a total of 150. 30 production models of male tanks, armed with naval cannon and machine guns, and females, carrying only machine guns, would go on to fight in history's first tank action at the Somme in September 1916. 28:31 Great Britain produced about 2,600 tanks of various types during the war. 32 The first tank to engage in battle was designated D1, a British Mark I male, during the Battle of Fles-Courcelette, part of the wider Somme offensive, on the 15th of September 1916. 33 Bert Cheney, a 19-year-old signaller with the 70th London Territorial Battalion, reported that 3 huge mechanical monsters such as he had never seen before rumbled their way onto the battlefield, frightening the Jerries out of their wits and making them scuttle like frightened rabbits. 34 When the news of the first use of the tanks emerged, Prime Minister David Lloyd George commented, "It is really to Mr. Winston Churchill that the credit is due more than to anyone else. He took up with enthusiasm the idea of making them a long time ago, and he met with many difficulties. He converted me, and at the Ministry of Munitions he went ahead and made them. The Admiralty experts were invaluable, and gave the greatest possible assistance. They are, of course, experts in the matter of armor plating." Major Stern, formerly an officer in the Royal Naval Air Service, a businessman at the Ministry of Munitions, had charge of the work of getting them built, and he did the task very well. Col Swinton and others also did valuable work. David Lloyd George, the 19th of September 1916. 35 French Renault foot tanks, re-operated by the U.S. Army, pioneered use of a fully traversable turret and served as pattern for most modern tanks. France. Whilst several experimental machines were investigated in France, it was a colonel of artillery, J.B. Estienne, who directly approached the commander-in-chief with detailed plans for a tank on Caterpillar tracks, in late 1915. The result was 2 largely unsatisfactory types of tank, 400 each of the Schneider and Saint Chamond, both based on the Holt tractor. The following year, the French pioneered the use of a full 360-degree rotation turret in a tank for the first time, with the creation of the Renault Footlight tank, with the turret containing the tank's main armament. In addition to the traversable turret, another innovative feature of the Foot was its engine located at the rear. This pattern with the gun located in a mounted turret and the engine at the back has become the standard for most succeeding tanks across the world even to this day. 36 The Foot was the most numerous tank of the war, over 3,000 were made by late 1918. Germany fielded very few tanks during World War I, and started development only after encountering British tanks on the Somme. The A7V, the only type made, was introduced in March 1918 with just 20 being produced during the war. 37 The first tank versus tank action took place on the 24th of April 1918 at the Second Battle of Villers-Bretonneux, France, when 3 British Mark IVs met 3 German A7Vs. Captured British Mk4s formed the bulk of Germany's tank forces during World War I. About 35 were in service at any one time. Plans to expand the tank program were underway when the war ended. Other nations. The United States Tank Corps used tanks supplied by France and Great Britain during World War I. Production of American-built tanks had just begun when the war came to an end. Italy also manufactured 2 Fiat 2000s towards the end of the war, too late to see service. Russia independently built and trialed 2 prototypes early in the war, the tracked, 2-man Vezdekhovd and the huge Lebedenko, but neither went into production. A tracked self-propelled gun was also designed but not produced. 38 Although tank tactics developed rapidly during the war, piecemeal deployments, mechanical problems, and poor mobility limited the military significance of the tank in World War I, and the tank did not fulfill its promise of rendering trench warfare obsolete. Nonetheless, it was clear to military thinkers on both sides that tanks in some way could have a significant role in future conflicts. 39. Interwar period. French Hotchkiss H-39 light tank of 1939. In the interwar period, tanks underwent further mechanical development. In terms of tactics, JFC Fuller's doctrine of spearhead attacks with massed tank formations was the basis for work by Heinz Guderian in Germany, Percy Hobart in Britain, Edna Chaffee, Jr., in the US, Charles de Gaulle in France, and Mikhail Tukhachevsky in the USSR. Little Hart held a more moderate view that all arms, cavalry, infantry and artillery should be mechanized and work together. The British formed the All-Arms Experimental Mechanized Force to test the use of tanks with supporting forces. In the Second World War, only Germany would initially put the theory into practice on a large scale, and it was their superior tactics and French blunders, not superior weapons, that made the Blitzkrieg so successful in May 1940. For information regarding tank development in this period, see tank development between the wars. Germany, Italy and the Soviet Union all experimented heavily with tank warfare during their clandestine and volunteer involvement in the Spanish Civil War, which saw some of the earliest examples of successful mechanized combined arms, such as when Republican troops, equipped with Soviet-supplied tanks and supported by aircraft, eventually routed Italian troops fighting for the nationalists in the Seven-Day Battle of Guadalajara in 1937. 41. However, of the nearly 700 tanks deployed during this conflict, only about 64 tanks representing the Franco faction and 331 from the Republican side were equipped with cannon, and of those 64 nearly all were World War I vintage Renault Foot tanks, while the 331 Soviet-supplied machines had 45mm main guns and were of 1930s manufacture. 42. The balance of nationalist tanks were machine gun armed. The primary lesson learned from this war was that machine gun army tanks had to be equipped with cannon, with the associated armor inherent to modern tanks. The 5-month-long war between the Soviet Union and the Japanese Sixth Army at Kharkhingal, Nomonhan, in 1939 brought home some lessons. In this conflict, the Soviets fielded over 2,000 tanks, to the around 73 cannon-armed tanks deployed by the Japanese, 43. The major difference being that Japanese armor were equipped with diesel engines as opposed to the Russian tanks equipped with petrol engines. 44. After General Georgy Zhukov inflicted a defeat on the Japanese Sixth Army with his massed combined tank and air attack, the Soviets learned a lesson on the use of gasoline engines, and quickly incorporated those newly found experiences into their new T-34 medium tank during World War II. 45. Prior to World War II, the tactics and strategy of deploying tank forces underwent a revolution. In August 1939, Soviet General Georgy Zhukov used the combined force of tanks and air power at Nomonhan against the Japanese Sixth Army wing. Smiley 46. Heinz Guderian, a tactical theoretician who was heavily involved in the formation of the first independent German tank force, said where tanks are, the front is, and this concept became a reality in World War II. 47. Guderian's armored warfare ideas, combined with Germany's existing doctrines of Bewegungskrieg, maneuver warfare, and infiltration tactics from World War I became the basis of Blitzkrieg in the opening stages of World War II. World War II. A row of 7 large German tanks from World War II lined up with their long cannons pointing up at an angle, as if saluting. German Tiger II tanks of Panzerabteilung 503, S.PZ.Abt 503, Feldherrn posing information for a German newsreel in 1944 during World War II, the first conflict in which armored vehicles were critical to battlefield success. The tank and related tactics developed rapidly. Armored forces proved capable of tactical victory in an unprecedentedly short amount of time, yet new